All right, let's transport ourselves back in time a bit. Okay. Imagine we're in ancient Crete. It's hot, the sun is beating down, and we stumble across these three older guys just hanging out, deep in conversation.
Sounds relaxing.
Yeah, totally. But here's the thing. These aren't just any three guys. We've got Cleinias Magellan, and then there's this Athenian stranger.
Mm.
And they're not exactly chatting about the weather.
Oh, so something a little more serious.
Much more. They're debating the very core purpose of laws. Like, what are laws actually for?
Okay, I'm intrigued. Already sounds more interesting than the weather.
And here's where it gets really interesting. They're not just talking about laws in the sense of keeping order, punishing criminals, that kind of thing.
So there's a deeper layer to this.
Exactly. They're exploring how laws can actually help create a society full of virtuous citizens. It's like, what if your legal system was also like a personal trainer, but for your morals?
Okay, now I'm really interested. Where are we getting all this from?
We're diving into Book I of Plato's Laws to really unpack all of this.
Plato, always a good choice for a deep dive.
You know it. And right from the beginning, Plato throws out this fascinating argument.
Uh-oh. What's he got up his sleeve now?
He says laws shouldn't just be about punishing people when they do something wrong. They should be actively cultivating virtue within a community.
So it's not just about reacting to bad behavior. It's about proactively encouraging good behavior.
You got it. And the stakes are pretty high here.
How so?
Well, Plato basically says that if laws don't focus on building good character, if they're not about promoting morality, well, society basically just falls apart.
I see what you mean about high stakes.
Yeah, he doesn't really sugarcoat it either. He paints a picture of a world where laws fail to promote morality. And it's pretty bleak.
I can imagine. So what's the alternative? What's Plato's solution to avoid this societal meltdown?
He puts a massive emphasis on education. He sees it as the foundation for any society that actually wants to be virtuous.
Education makes sense. But where do the laws fit into all of this?
That's the key. Laws become the tools to educate everyone about morality.
I see. So it's not just about laws saying don't steal. It's about also explaining why stealing is wrong, how it hurts other people, and how it damages the community as a whole.
That's exactly it. The laws themselves become teachers, guiding people toward a life of virtue.
That's quite a different perspective on law.
Right? And it's actually a bit different from what he talked about in the Republic, isn't it?
You're right. Good catch. In the Republic, Plato had this idea of philosopher-kings. Basically, these super wise individuals who would guide society directly. Like, imagine if Jedi Masters were running the government.
Okay, yeah. That sounds pretty epic.
Right. But also maybe not the most practical approach.
I mean, where do you even find all these philosopher-kings? And would they even want to rule?
That's precisely where laws takes a bit of a different turn. It's more grounded, more practical. Like Plato realized that philosopher-kings aren't exactly lining up to take charge.
So we had to come up with a plan B.
Exactly. And that plan B is what laws is all about. He shifts his focus to well-crafted legal systems as the main way to cultivate virtue.
So instead of relying on a few exceptional people at the top, it's about building a system that works for everyone, a system that's accessible to all.
You got it. It's a total shift in strategy. And I think we can see this evolution in how Plato's thinking developed.
It's like he's moving away from these utopian ideals and landing on something much more achievable, something that could actually work in the real world.
Absolutely. In the Republic, it's all about those elite rulers shaping society. But in laws, he puts his faith in a well-designed system, that same goal of widespread virtue, but achieved through a different means.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And it brings us to one of the big takeaways from Book I are meant to be more than just rules. They're supposed to be moral teachers. And widespread education is absolutely essential for building a just and virtuous society.
Education and laws working hand in hand.
Exactly. It's like this dynamic duo working together to make society better.
I like it. But how does that actually play out? What are some specific ways these laws are supposed to teach virtue? It can't just be a list of rules, right?
He gets into some interesting specifics. Like, for instance, he talks about laws that encourage hospitality.
Wait, laws about being hospitable to guests?
Yeah. Imagine laws that basically tell people, hey, you should welcome strangers and travelers into your homes.
That's interesting. It seems a little, well, specific for a law, don't you think?
It might seem strange to us, but Plato saw it as a way to build generosity and community spirit. Like by making hospitality a legal expectation. It becomes a social expectation, too. You're shaping people's behavior. And Plato would argue their character over time.
So instead of just saying, don't be a jerk to strangers, you create a system that encourages kindness and openness.
Exactly. And this is just one example. He gets into others too, like laws about marriage, religious practices, even how people spend their leisure time.
Wow. It sounds like he wants laws to influence pretty much every aspect of life.
He kind of does.
Mm.
And that brings us to something else that's interesting, how Plato defines virtue. Because he's not just talking about following rules. When he says virtue, he means developing specific qualities of character.
Okay, so what did he consider virtue? What kind of qualities are we talking about?
Well, for Plato, virtue was all about things like wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. These weren't just abstract ideas. They were practical traits that make people better. And they make society better, too.
So those are the building blocks of virtue. But how did he see laws actually instilling those qualities in people?
That's where it gets really fascinating. He argued that laws could shape character by tapping into our natural desires for pleasure and our aversion to pain.
So, like using positive and negative reinforcement to train people to be virtuous.
You can put it that way. But it's actually more nuanced than just rewards and punishments. Plato believed that well-crafted laws could help people really understand the nature of pleasure and pain, to see that true happiness doesn't come from just indulging every whim.
It's about aligning our desires with what's truly good for us and for others.
Exactly. It's not about making bad things illegal and good things legal. It's about using the legal system to teach people about what actually leads to a good life.
And in book 1, Plato's laying out how to do this. It's like he's giving us the blueprint for building a society where the laws themselves help us become better people.
It's definitely a radical idea, but also kind of inspiring.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how could our legal system be designed to better cultivate virtue? Like, what would that even look like?
Now, that's a question we're thinking about, and it's a great place to pause for now. We've seen Plato move away from the philosopher-king idea. We've seen his emphasis on laws as tools for shaping character, and we've touched on the crucial role of education, but there's a lot more to unpack as we move forward.
Absolutely. Stay tuned, because next time we'll be diving into even more of Plato's thought-provoking ideas. We'll be exploring how he connects those ideas to education and how he envisions the ideal society taking shape.
It's going to be a fascinating journey. So make sure you join us for the next part of our deep dive into Plato's laws.
So we're seeing this shift in Plato's thinking, right? Away from those philosopher-kings and toward this idea of carefully crafted laws that can actually help shape people's character. And of course, there's that other huge piece he brings up, education.
He really goes all in on education in Book I. He sees it as the absolute bedrock of a virtuous society. And this is where he ties it all back to the laws. You see, laws become this amazing vehicle for mass moral education.
It's like instead of hoping we stumble upon some all-knowing ruler, we focus on creating laws that encourage everyone to become more virtuous, to actually strive for goodness.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Plato says laws shouldn't just stop us from doing bad things. They should also actively guide us toward becoming better versions of ourselves.
Okay, so what does that look like? How can laws do that? I mean, beyond just saying, don't do this bad thing.
Well, he uses stealing as an example. If a law simply says don't steal, it's setting a pretty low bar, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's telling you the bare minimum what not to do.
But what if those laws also encourage generosity? Or what if they emphasized honesty and fairness in every interaction?
That it's not just about avoiding punishment. It's about actually trying to cultivate positive character traits. It's about aiming for something higher.
Exactly. That's the kind of society Plato envisions, one where the legal system itself is this force for moral improvement.
That's a powerful idea. It's like laws actually designed to help us become better people, not just obedient citizens.
That's a great way to put it. And it raises a really interesting question for us. If we were to design lives with the explicit goal of making us more virtuous, what would those laws even look like?
That's a tough one. It makes you think beyond just what actions to prohibit and start thinking about how laws could actively promote positive values.
It's a totally different way of looking at the purpose of law.
Definitely. And it's something worth pondering. I mean, what would a legal system look like if it was truly designed to cultivate the best in us?
It's a big question. And it's just one of the many thought-provoking ideas that come up when you dive into these ancient texts. It's not just about historical insights. It's about finding inspiration for building a better future.
So we've got Plato moving away from the philosopher-king idea, focusing on laws as tools for shaping character, and highlighting the crucial role of education. Is there anything else from Book I that we should cover before moving on?
Oh, absolutely. There's one more crucial piece he delves into, and it's surprisingly relevant to how we live today. He talks about pleasure and pain and the way they influence our choices.
It's like he's anticipating all those YOLO moments gone wrong.
Right. He was way ahead of his time. Plato wasn't a fan of just chasing every fleeting pleasure. He believed that true happiness comes from living a life guided by reason and virtue, not just indulging every whim.
So, those late-night pizza binges might feel good in the moment, but they're not exactly paving the path to a virtuous life.
Not according to Plato, anyway. He really emphasized self-control and moderation, finding that sweet spot between enjoying life's pleasures and having the discipline to avoid those that lead us astray.
It's about training ourselves to desire the right things, the things that actually contribute to our well-being, to the well-being of others.
And he saw law as this important guide on that path. Not just a bunch of rules, but something that could help us navigate the tricky world of pleasure and pain, and ultimately point us towards a more fulfilling way of living.
So it's like acknowledging that even our desires need to be shaped and guided, and that law can be part of that process.
Exactly. His whole goal was to create a society where people could live truly fulfilling lives. Lives rooted in virtue and guided by reason, not just chasing temporary highs.
It's a challenging vision, but I think it's hard to argue with the idea that a life focused on virtue is ultimately more satisfying than one driven purely by fleeting desires. But how far did Plato take this idea? Was it just about big moral choices, or did he get into the everyday details of how people should live?
He went deep. Plato believed laws should address every aspect of human experience, not just major crimes. He argued that they should even cover things like manners, social interactions, and how we spend our free time.
Wait, so he thought laws should dictate how we behave at a party?
Well, his point was that even those seemingly small actions can have a ripple effect on the moral fabric of society. If everyone's rude and disrespectful at a party, it creates this negative energy that can spill over into other areas.
So it's like saying that every choice we make contributes to either a more virtuous or a less virtuous society. Even being polite can make a difference.
Exactly. And on the flip side, if everyone's courteous and thoughtful, it creates a much more harmonious environment, one that benefits everyone. Plato recognized that every action, big or small, ultimately matters.
It's like he's zooming in on all those tiny details that add up to a virtuous life. And it's like, hey, let's pay attention to this stuff. It matters more than you think.
And that attention to detail shows just how committed Plato was to crafting laws that left no stone unturned. He wasn't content with just stopping major crimes. He wanted to create a society where virtue permeated every aspect of life.
So it's not just a few big laws governing the major stuff. It's this whole network of laws, big and small, all working together to nudge people toward virtue in every single area of their lives.
That's a great way to put it. And it brings us back to that big question we were talking about earlier. If laws were really designed to make us better people, what specific laws would we need?
It's such a fascinating question because it forces us to look at our own values. What do we prioritize? What kind of society do we want to live in?
And it challenges us to imagine a legal system that goes beyond just punishing wrongdoing and actually focuses on cultivating the best in us.
It's definitely a lot to think about. But speaking of challenging ideas, Plato gets into some really specific ones when it comes to education. I mean, we were talking about laws as teachers, but what about more traditional forms of education? What did he have to say about that?
Oh, this is where things get really interesting. He has some very strong opinions on how to raise those ideal, virtuous citizens. And it all starts with something you might not expect. Music.
Wait, music. I thought we were talking about laws and virtue, not concert halls and symphonies.
That's the beauty of Plato's thinking. He saw these deep connections between all these seemingly different parts of life. For him, music wasn't just entertainment. It was this incredibly powerful tool for shaping character.
So he wasn't just thinking about what songs would sound good at a party. He was thinking about how different kinds of music could actually influence people's behavior.
Exactly. He believed that different types of music could evoke different emotions and even influence actions. But he wasn't a fan of just any kind of music, though.
Let me guess. No death metal or anything too crazy.
He probably wouldn't have approved. He favored music that promoted harmony, balance, and a sense of order. Think more like calming classical music or uplifting folk songs. It's like he was trying to create a soundtrack for a virtuous society.
So curating the perfect playlist for moral development?
Pretty much. But this focus on music actually highlights a key part of his whole approach to education. Plato didn't think education should just be about filling kids' heads with facts and figures.
So it wasn't all about memorizing dates and formulas and stuff like that.
Exactly. For him, true education was about developing the whole person. their mind, their character, their appreciation for beauty and goodness. It was about shaping well-rounded citizens, not just skilled workers.
Citizens who could contribute to the community, who could live meaningful and purposeful lives, not just cogs in the machine, but people who could think critically, act ethically, and appreciate the beauty of a well-lived life.
Precisely. And that's an idea that still resonates today. In a world that's obsessed with specialization and technical skills, it's easy to forget how important that holistic view of education really is. We need to remember that knowledge without virtue can actually be pretty dangerous.
It's a good reminder that developing strong character and a sense of responsibility is just as important as learning all those technical skills. We need both if we want to build a truly flourishing society.
And that's a message that transcends time and place. It's as true today as it was in ancient Greece. So, as we move forward in our exploration of laws, we're left with this powerful idea: laws as moral teachers, education as the foundation for virtue, and a society where everything from the laws to the stories we tell to the way we treat each other, all of it works together to shape who we become.
It's a pretty challenging vision,
Yeah.
but also incredibly inspiring. It makes you think about what we can do to create a world where laws and education work together to bring out the best in humanity.
It's about asking ourselves, what are we doing to cultivate virtue in our own lives and in the lives of others? What kind of society are we creating?
Those are definitely questions worth asking, especially as we try to navigate all the complexities of the world we live in today.
And that's what makes these ancient texts so valuable. They don't just offer us a glimpse into the past, they give us a framework for understanding our present and shaping our future.
So if you're up for some deep thinking, I highly recommend checking out Plato's Laws. It might just change how you view everything from politics to parenting to even the power of a good story.
And we'll be back soon with more deep dives into the world of big ideas, exploring those fascinating texts and thought-provoking concepts that continue to shape who we are.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. So we've been talking about education, and it seems like Plato's saying it's not just about memorizing a bunch of stuff, it's about shaping character. And music even plays a role in that.
Music is definitely a big part of it, but he goes even deeper into the nuances of education in Book 2. It's fascinating stuff. He talks about how crucial early childhood education is for shaping virtuous citizens.
Okay, so starting from a young age, what's his approach? Did he, want everyone to go to ancient Greek preschool?
Well, he doesn't get into specifics like that, but he emphasizes the importance of play and storytelling in early education. He believed that kids learn best through imitation and active engagement, not rote memorization.
So less about drilling information and more about creating fun, engaging experiences that also teach good values. Seems pretty progressive for his time.
It was. Plato saw play as this amazing way to teach kids about fairness, cooperation, even courage. He believed that well-designed games could help them develop these virtues without even realizing they're being taught.
It's like sneaking in moral lessons while they're having fun. I like that idea. What about storytelling? What role did that play in his educational vision?
Plato believed stories were super powerful for shaping young minds, but he was very particular about the kinds of stories kids should hear.
Okay, let me guess. No bedtime stories about mischievous gods or epic battles.
He wasn't a fan of those. He thought stories should always highlight virtue and piety. He argued that stories about gods and heroes should show them as models of good behavior, not flawed characters who are always fighting or doing questionable things.
So the ancient Greek equivalent of G-rated fairy tales. No bad guys allowed.
Pretty much. He believed these idealized stories would help kids develop a strong sense of morality and inspire them to be like the virtuous characters they were hearing about.
It's interesting how much importance he placed on those early narratives. It's like they become the foundation for a child's whole worldview.
Exactly. He thought these early influences had a huge impact on a person's character. And this actually brings us to another important point. The role of the community in education. Plato didn't believe education was solely the responsibility of parents or teachers.
So it wasn't just about what happened at home or in school. He saw a bigger role for society as a whole.
Exactly. He thought the entire community should be involved in raising the next generation. He said that laws and social custom should all reinforce the values being taught at home and in school.
It's like creating this whole ecosystem of virtue where everything is working together to raise good citizens.
Yeah.
That's pretty ambitious, don't you think?
Very ambitious, but also kind of inspiring. It reminds us that education isn't something that happens in isolation. It's a collective effort that requires everyone to be on board.
Makes sense. But it also makes you wonder how realistic it actually is. Can you really design a society where everything is perfectly aligned to promote virtue?
That's the big question, and it's something people are still debating today. But even if Plato's vision isn't entirely achievable, it offers us valuable lessons about the power of education and the importance of creating a culture that supports good character.
It's a good reminder that we can't just assume things will work out. We need to be intentional about building a society that values virtue, both as individuals and as a whole.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that message is as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. So, as we wrap up our exploration of Plato's laws, we're left with some powerful takeaways. Laws can be more than just rules, they can be teachers. Education is the foundation for building a virtuous society. And shaping character is a responsibility we all share.
It's a vision that challenges us to really think about our own values, our laws, our approach to education. What are we doing to cultivate virtue in ourselves and in the people around us? What kind of world are we creating?
Those are the questions that matter. And that's what makes engaging with these classic texts so valuable. They offer us a chance to step outside our own time and place, to gain new perspectives, and maybe even find inspiration for building a better future.
So if you're looking for some serious food for thought, I highly recommend checking out Plato's Laws. It might just change the way you see the world.
And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive, exploring those big ideas that shape who we are and how we understand the world around us. We'll be back soon with more deep dives, more fascinating texts, more thought-provoking conversations. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning.